The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for showing up today for our second webinar in our winter webinar series, The Science of Color Therapy. I am seeing a few more people hopping on, so let's just give it another couple seconds. While we're waiting, if you didn't catch our Tuesday webinar on empowering patients, one on behavioral health, there will be a webinar replay on that on the website. The next weeks are on saving lives, saving money, and future-proofing your facilities on Tuesday. And next Thursday, David and I are going to be going over MRI lighting through the ages. I see a couple more people hopping on. All right, let's get started. So again, welcome to the Science of Color Therapy, from wavelengths to patient outcomes. My name is Amanda Scheidemann, and I am the Director of Marketing here at Curlin, and I am joined by Scott Teschendorf, our Central Regional Sales Manager.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Hey, I want to start by reframing the phrase color therapy. When people hear that term, they sometimes think of something vague or alternative, colored bulbs as a treatment or dramatic emotional claims. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is this. Light has measurable biological effects. Color influences arousal and perception. And modern lighting systems give us tools to shape the spectrum, the intensity, the timing, and the control in ways that could support healthcare environments. Lighting does not replace treatment, it does not cure disease, but it shapes the environment in which care happens. And that environment influences stress, sleep, orientation, and performance.
So why are we talking about this specifically in healthcare as a general rule for this webinar? If you think about healthcare settings, they're full of physiological and emotional stressors. People tend to go into the healthcare facilities anxious, they're stressed. They don't go in there because they're excited about doing a whole lot of things, generally speaking. Sleep tends to be disrupted. In behavioral health, arousal or alertness, the levels can escalate really quickly. In ICUs, circadian rhythms are often completely flattened because people are coming in and going out all day and all night, and so they have no idea what time it is. At the same time, the staff are operating under artificial lighting for extended periods, sometimes with very little meaningful daylight exposure. Lighting is one of the few environmental variables that we can actually tune. It's non-pharmacologic, so no medication. It doesn't add side effects. It doesn't require a prescription. And with modern LED systems, we can adjust that spectrum, intensity, timing, and color, sometimes in real time. And there's growing evidence that a lot of things can be affected by color and the intensity of the rooms, which we'll get into here throughout the webinar. Now, these aren't dramatic overnight transformations we're going to be talking about. They aren't a flip of a switch, pun intended, but environments where stress and sleep disruptions are common, even modest improvements matter. Healthcare facilities tend to run 24/7, but the human body doesn't. And lighting is one of the tools we have to bridge that gap.
So let's begin to lay the groundwork. Let's zoom out for a moment and ground this in science. Visible light spans roughly 390 to 700 nanometers. What we perceive as color depends on wavelength, but also on context and contrast. There are two major pathways light takes in the body. The first is the visual pathway, through the rods and the cones of the eyes. That's how we see color, contrast, and detail. The second is the non-image forming pathway. Specialized retinal cells called IPRGCs, these are especially sensitive to blue wavelengths, and they communicate directly with our circadian clock. So the same light that looks cool white to us visually is also sending biological signals telling us whether it's day or night. So that's why the spectrum matters. Two light sources can both be 3000 K on a spec sheet, but their spectral power distribution can be very different biologically. If we simplify it, higher CCT or blue enriched light is generally more alerting. Lower CCTs, warmer light, is generally more calming. Brightness amplifies whatever effect you're creating. So a very bright, warm light can still feel stimulating. This becomes especially important in spaces like behavioral health, dementia care, oncology infusion, and patient rooms at night. You're not just choosing a color temperature for aesthetics, you're influencing physiology. Now let's layer emotion on top of that. Color influences arousal. Cool tones, particularly blues and greens, tend to reduce physiological activation in many people. Heart rates may lower slightly and breathing can regulate. Warm tones can feel comforting, but at higher intensities, they can also feel stimulating. Brightness amplifies everything. A dim, cool environment can feel calm. A very bright, cool environment can feel clinical and activating. So when we design healthcare lighting, we're influencing both visual perception and the nervous system tone. So warm, low CCT, calming, relaxing, evening support. Cool, high CCT is alerting, stimulating, daytime support. Brightness and saturation amplify response.
Now, we have to be careful here. We don't want to overstate any of these claims. There are lighting effects that are strongly supported by research. Circadian entrainment, alertness modulation, sleep disruption from evening blue and rich light. These are well established and well researched. There are other effects like specific hues producing specific emotional outcomes that are promising, but more context dependent or research is still ongoing for them. So let's frame the rest of this webinar on this. Lighting supports circadian health. Lighting can modulate arousal. Lighting complements care, but it's not a standalone therapy and it is not a standalone solution. And that's an important boundary we need to make sure we talk about.
Now that we've grounded this in biology, the next question is, what do we actually do with the information as designers? This is where the lighting tools come in. So how do we actually apply this? When people hear color therapy lighting, they often picture saturated RGB everywhere. But in reality, we're working with 4 primary levers. First is spectrum, or CCT. This is your warm to cool conversation. This lever has the strongest biological impact. Second, the chroma, how saturated the color is. This influences emotional tone more than circadian biology. Third, the dynamics. How does that light change over time? Fourth, control. Who can adjust the lighting and how? So let's unpack those. Tunable white is often the most powerful everyday tool in healthcare. In a patient room, daytime might involve slightly cooler, brighter light, particularly vertical illumination at eye level to support orientation. As the evening approaches, lighting gradually warms and dims. At night, low-level, warm or amber pathway lighting protects sleep while preserving safety. This doesn't feel dramatic, it feels intuitive because biologically it mirrors the expectation. What we have to be careful is when nighttime lighting, high CCTs, high intensity light at 2 a.m. might meet visibility requirements, but it may also disrupt your rest. So spectrum decisions are physiological decisions.
So if tunable white light is healthcare lighting's #1 answer for a lot of spaces, when do we actually use colored light? Not every space is going to need it, although in my opinion, it's fun to look at and it's fun to talk about. Colored light works best when it's short-term and intentional. Think a sensory room or a behavioral health de-escalation space like the image you can see on the screen, pediatric environments, pre-treatment oncology waiting areas. And then, even then, colored lighting should act as an accent layer, not as the only light in the room. Clinical tasks should stay under quality white light, and color should support the emotional layer without compromising care.
In healthcare environments, lighting isn't just about color, it's about behavior. Static lighting provides predictability and a sense of safety. That matters. Dynamic lighting can gently influence emotional state, but transitions are critical. How that light changes is just as important as what color it is. So abrupt shifts can feel jarring. Gradual fades, typically 30 to 90 seconds, feel natural and supportive. The nervous system responds to tempo. In neurological and behavioral health settings, especially avoid pulsing, strobing, or anything theatrical, dynamic lighting in healthcare is usually subtle. So the slow transitions from morning to day to evening, they're calm, they're intentional, and almost unnoticeable.
So one of the most powerful elements in all of this is perceived control. When a patient feels like they have some agency or control over their environment, stress levels drop. But too much control actually increases stress. So good hierarchy for controls may look like this: having just a basic staff global presets. The second one, a little more in-depth, maybe simple patient or staff choices, maybe 3 or 4 labeled scenes. Full RGB or RGBW sliders should only be in specialty rooms that are with a faculty or a staff member who has been trained and who knows how to use them and use them well. If people, especially the staff, don't understand why scenes exist, they're not going to use them. So I want to talk here briefly about the Empower system, wall station system that Carlin introduced. We introduced these specifically because in spaces like behavioral health, having control for patients is really important, and it gives them a little bit of control where everything else feels uncontrollable a lot of the times. So in, say, a patient room, you could have our little Empower 0 to 10 volt, which is just a simple button press on off and a touch to dim. A couple buttons maybe that says ambient, reading, and nighttime or something like that. Just very simple lighting controls that are safe for patients but are easy to use. And then we also have our Empower DMX solution. So this is where control for color changing can be done. But again, we don't want to overwhelm patients with a lot of different choices or the staff with those many choices. We want to make sure that anything that is in the space is easy to use, easy to control, so that while they are there with patients, it is not something that you are trying to figure out while also doing therapy with them. So our DMX station is, again, ligature and vandal resistant. It is going to be a very robust station, but it's very simple. There's an on-off button, 8 preset scenes that you don't have to have commissioned or anything like that, and you can just press those next arrows. So if you ever, I'm dating myself here a little bit, if you ever skip to the next song on an iPod, you can be able to change the scenes for this. So overall, just remember that good control is simple, it's guardrailed, and it's intentional.
Which brings us to applications. Let's walk through how this plays out in different healthcare environments. In a standard patient room, the goal is balance. Let's think about it in layers. The daytime supports activity and orientation. It's going to be slightly brighter, potentially slightly cooler, especially at eye level. Evening supports winding down. The light should gradually warm to dim. Night supports deep sleep with minimal disruption, low glare pathway lighting, toe kicks, bathroom guidance, chart lights, without that high CCT overhead blast in the middle of the night. Layering allows you to balance rest with care. Small spectral shifts can make a noticeable difference in how the room feels at 2 a.m. When lighting is predictable, gradual, and easy to control, it reduces stress for both the patients and the staff alike. In an ICU and NICU environment, circadian rhythm is often completely flattened. Providing clear, visible day and night differentiation can help reinforce orientation, not just for the patients, but for the staff as well. Vertical illumination matters. It supports facial recognition, communication, and clinical interaction. Staff override scenes are critical, but they should reset easily without being harsh or jarring, so the room doesn't stay in exam mode for hours. And then one simple but important point: by avoiding putting light directly in the patient's eyes whenever possible. Sounds obvious, sometimes we have to state it, especially in critical care settings. In critical care, stability is therapeutic.
Shifting tacks a little bit into behavioral health environments, lighting here becomes part of the de-escalation strategy. We're trying to lower arousal or lower alertness. We are trying to avoid triggers and support emotional regulation. That usually means softer base lighting or general room lighting, mid to low color temperatures, and lower contrast environments. If or when color is introduced, it's typically controlled and limited, often blue or green weighted for calming effects or slightly warming colors if needed. We tend to avoid highly saturated red. We avoid overly brightly lit corridors, avoid high color temperature lighting at night, just like we do everywhere else. And of course, the fixture selection matters. None of anything we're talking about here in Science of Color Therapy makes any difference if the fixtures and the controls in the space are not designed for safety and security in these spaces. They have to be ligature resistant, vandal resistant, tamper resistant. That design is non-negotiable. It doesn't matter at all what we put in there if it's not a safe space for people to be in. These lights need to support that safety, stability, and regulation, not be overstimulating for people. Moving on to sensory rooms, this is where color can become a primary modality. It's something that we see in behavioral health facilities and healthcare facilities, but we are also seeing it show up in a lot of other places. In this case, it's actually in an airport, but we've seen it in educational facilities, train stations, libraries, all sorts of different spaces. But here, the architectural shell is going to stay neutral and color is introduced intentionally through a wall wash, fiber optics, projections, bubble tubes, or integrated RGB or RGBW systems. Typical scenes might include calming blue or green tones, softer warm tones for that gentle activation, but these rooms work best when they're integrated into a therapeutic protocol, especially in healthcare facilities, and they're not just used randomly, willy-nilly. Lighting here would become part of a structured calming strategy where it's not decorative, it's purposeful.
In imaging rooms, anxiety often peaks before the scan even begins. Offering patients a simple choice of color before the procedure can create a sense of agency and reduce stress. During the scan, static or gentle dynamic color can help support a calming environment also. But when clinical precision is required, there's emergency or contrast assessment, that room must return to acute white immediately. Layering protects both emotional tone and clinical accuracy. Lighting should support the experience without ever compromising the medicine.
And I just want to do a quick plug. If you want to learn more about MRI lighting, make sure you come to next Thursday's webinar on MRI itself. Back to this one. In dementia and memory care environments, contrast and clarity are critical here. The aging eye needs higher contrast cues and strong vertical illumination to see faces and signage clearly. We want to avoid any patchy shadows. Dark holes or dark shadows can be perceived as obstacles or even holes that they could fall into. In the evening, having warmer, low glare lighting can help reduce agitation, or what some people know as sundowning, and can support calmer nighttime environments.
In oncology and infusion environments, anxiety is often highest before the treatment even begins. That waiting period is an opportunity for subtle environment calming, sometimes with soft, blue-biased accent lighting. Once treatment begins, neutral, comfortable white light supports both clinical assessment and patient comfort. Optional patient-controlled accent lighting can provide a sense of agency without affecting the clinical task lighting. Layering here again is critical. Subtle, calming cues in waiting areas, neutral white during the treatment, optional accents that never compromise care. Color supports emotional tone and white light supports precision. They don't compete, they coexist.
So those are some of the primary environments where these strategies show up in healthcare. Let's talk about how to implement them without overcomplicating the project. So implementation can be where good intentions can go wrong. The first mistake could be overusing saturated colors. If everything is always glowing blue or purple, it stops feeling therapeutic and starts feeling theatrical. Remember, we want to incorporate color gently and specifically for uses, and intensity is going to matter here. Healthcare environments need restraint, and coloring works best as a layer, not the entire room. Second, dynamic effects that are too fast or gimmicky. If you're going pulsing or rapid shifts, dynamic color sweeps, they can look really impressive in a demo or a sales call, but they can also increase anxiety in real populations, especially in behavioral health, neurological settings, or anywhere else that anxiety and that stress level is peak. Third, having too many scenes. If you hand a staff a wall station with 12 unlabeled buttons, no one's going to use it. Having something simple and labeled wins every time. Fourth, skipping commissioning. If the day and night scenes aren't tested at day and night, the circadian intent that you design into the facility may never actually happen. And finally, we want to make sure that we don't overstate the science with, our building owners and other shareholders. If we promise dramatic therapeutic outcomes, we can lose credibility. The power of lighting is in support and modulation, not a cure. But one thing, just if you need to get a bearing, if it feels like Vegas, it's not therapeutic, it's alerting.
So how do we implement this responsibly? Well, it starts again with programming. Let's define the clinical goal of the space. Is the objective calm, or to be alert, or wayfinding, or de-escalation? Those answers should guide every lighting decision. During design, select the appropriate CCT ranges and coordinate finishes carefully. Materials interact with the spectrum. A warm wall color under a cool light can shift perception quickly. Define the control hierarchy early. Who has access? What are the resets? How many scenes? Then commissioning. Test day and night scenes. Walk the space. Stand at the patient's eye level. Make the adjustments. And then train the staff on what each scene is intended to do. And if they understand the purpose, they're more likely to use it. So intentional lighting supports intentional care, but only if it stays intentional after occupancy.
So all in all, if you only take a few things away from this webinar, we hope it's these: that lighting influences more than visibility. It influences alertness, mood, and circadian biology. We don't need to overcomplicate that, and we don't need to oversell it. Tunable white is often the most powerful everyday tool that we've got. Supporting day and night rhythms alone can make a meaningful difference in healthcare environments for patients and for the staff. Saturated color has its place, but it works best when it's intentional, layered, and tied to a specific therapeutic goal. Again, we're going to say it a lot. We said it a lot, but control matters. Simple, clearly labeled scenes with thoughtful guardrails reduce stress more effectively than having unlimited options. And most importantly, every lighting decision should connect back to a clinical objective, not aesthetics, not trends, not for the Instagram photo, not just technology. Lighting doesn't replace care, but it absolutely shapes the environment where care happens, and that's worth making sure we get it right. With that, we will take any questions.
All right, so if you do have any of those questions, feel free to type them in the question section of the GoToWebinar, and it will wing its way over to me. Would love to see some of those come through. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming out to today's webinar. We really appreciate it. It looks like the first question is, how do you measure circadian effectiveness? And that's a really great question. It's something that, there are different ways of doing it. There are different metrics that can, in fact, be used on circadian rhythm and circadian effectiveness, whether it's melanopic lux, EDI. I didn't get into all the details as I wanted to talk about color and some other different aspects as well. There are definitely ways that you can utilize melanopic lux and EDI into facilities, and you can use, IES's RP 46. Sorry, I have the number wrong. In order to help do some metrics that can validate your circadian rhythm. Thanks, Ken. He's on this call today, and he's definitely one of the forefront people for that. So that's always a great aspect. And one of the questions is, how does this address IES RP 46 criteria and meet watts per square foot? It kind of depends. I'm not exactly sure what part you're talking about. Color is going to be different than tunable white for sure. Tunable white can have a little bit higher watts per square foot. requirements, depending on your code and depending on how your system is set up. It is just something to keep in mind that it can have slightly higher, but a lot of times anymore, it's not much higher wattage for a fixture when you have the tunable white version, because they've gotten much more efficient than they used to be in the past. Next question is, how can I customize scenes on the Empower? I am going to assume that you're talking about the Empower DMX, because the Empower 0 to 10 volt is just on, off, and dim. So I will pull up, I'm on our website now, I'm going to pull up our Empower system. Empower DMX is our little small vandal resistant DMX fixture or controller, like I said. You can see here that we've got 3 preset scenes already that you can choose different options, and then you can always customize the scene. So if you go to page 2, you can see that our preset scene 1 is all different static colors and being able to just do different static color options. Excuse me, I've been talking all day. Preset scene 2 is some static colors and some dynamic colors. Again, we're looking at this one specifically, a lot of those blues, those greens, those calming color options, and then slight warm activations. So we've got that yellow, and then the greens, the blues, the purples, and then slow dynamic fades of those same colors. And then the third option is dynamic colors. Again, those slow fades in and out of different shades, and being able to cycle through all of those. Another question that got asked this morning is, if we did do a custom, scenes, do we have to do 8? And the answer to that is no. If you only want, say, dynamic scenes of shades of blue, shades of green, shades of pink, purple, and blue, you can just have those 3 scenes if you want. And then if you so do that and you're cycling between them, you would just cycle between 1, 2, 3, and then once you hit 3, it cycles right back to 1. So you don't have to have 8 if you're doing custom color scene selections. If you do in fact want to do custom colors, please contact your regional, contact your rep for Curlin, and we'd be more than happy to help walk you through what those look like and what the priorities are for that. Let's see. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the webinar. I appreciate it. Next question is, are there colors that we should avoid in behavioral health? And I mentioned it a little bit in the webinar. I didn't go into super detail. I wanted to keep it to time, but it is something that a lot of people tend to design to avoid highly saturated reds. I also, we talk about behavioral health fixtures and behavioral health lighting in our CEU seminars in our office. And one time we had somebody come out who had done a de-escalation space, and they had a story that there was somebody who kept coming in and out, and they, could not, it would take days for them to de-escalate, for them to calm down, return to a state where they wouldn't be risk to themselves or other people. It would take days, and they'd be in and out, in and out, in and out. And then they built this de-escalation room, which had color in it. So it had different colors. They could choose what color it was. They didn't hear anything, so they went in and checked on him a couple hours after he went into the room, and he was sitting there completely calm, completely surrounded in red light. So I will say that color is subjective to the person. It is subjective to the culture. So everyone has slightly different reactions to color. And it's something that is currently being studied and has been studied before as well. So it's something that while we can have guidelines on what ones we tend to avoid, hard and fast rules on color therapy is still ongoing, and it's still being learned about and still being talked about and figured out. But it also, what might be true for somebody might not be true for somebody else. I might like to work under a warmer yellow light all day, whereas somebody needs to work under a cooler light all morning and then a warmer light in the afternoon. That's a personal choice, and it's what works for that specific person. Color can be the same as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, that everything can be slightly different for the individual. I don't see any more questions coming through. If you do have any, please feel free to type them in. Otherwise, I'm going to do A couple quick little plugs on our website. If you go to the Learn and Inspire tab on our website, you can see that this is the webinar you're in right now, which is the Science of Color Therapy. We have 2 more webinars next week. Chris and Logan are doing Saving Lives, Saving Money, and Future-Proofing Facilities next Tuesday. And then we're going to wrap up the series of the winter webinars with MRI lighting evolving with technology with David and me next Thursday. So we'd love to have you join for one or both of those sessions. You can find the links to register either in your e-blast the day before, or you can register on our website under the Learn and Inspire Webinars and Events tab. And then if you decide or you have more questions, want more details, want to chat more about any color therapy or spaces or about our products, you can always go to our company Find a Rep tab, where you can see who your rep is for a specific territory. I always like to choose Texas, 1, because I've got a lot of reps, 2, because I'm from Texas, so therefore, it's nice to do that. So you can see who your rep is for the different areas, and then if you scroll all the way down, you can also see who the regional is. And in this case, it is my co-presenter, Scott Teschendorf. So you can find contact information on our website quite easily, whether it's the rep or our regional salesperson. So if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to continue to have this conversation more. But otherwise, I want to say thank you again so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your Thursday and a great Friday tomorrow. Thanks.